We've got one more speaker for the rally, and then we're going to take a couple of laps around the square. And the final speaker is the national president for the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent more than 750,000 federal workers across the United States. He is an Alabama native, was the first black president at the Anniston Army Depot AFGE local. I am incredibly proud to present to you the national president of AFGE, Reverend Everett Kelley.
Good evening, brothers and sisters. What about a labor? It's a good evening. Good evening, brothers and sisters. It is good to be here this evening, and I want to start by saying thank you for being here. To the leadership of the North Alabama Labor Council, I am very gracious to be here. President Rika Langford, Vice President Bob McManus, Secretary Treasurer Jacob Morrison, Sergeant-at-Arms George Alexander, Trustees McClellan, Etheridge, and Thomas. Thank you all for being here this evening. And of course, our own AFGE Local 1858, led by Abner Meriwether, and such a gracious executive board. Thank you. And to all of the speakers that were privileged to speak before me. And, let's give it up for our labor union that has provided the sound today. Thank you so much for them. And thank you for continuing the proud tradition of labor all across this country. Because just by being here today, just by showing up, you are reminding this country what solidarity really means. That an injury to one is an injury to all. That in the words of Dr. King, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. This is a labor event in support of Black Lives Matter. And I want you to know that AFGE stand with you. Stand with the fiber, the understanding of Black Lives Matter. On my way driving here yesterday, as Brother Morrison indicated, we represent about 750,000 union members. And I got a phone call, and they says to me, why does it have to be Black Lives Matter? Don't all lives matter? I said, of course all lives matter. I said, but in your neighborhood, if your neighbor's house is on fire, who do you call the fireman for? Do you call the fireman for the neighborhood, or do you call the fireman for the house that's on fire? And I submit to us today that this is a house that's on fire. So those are the lives that matter. But I want to spend a few minutes today discussing the importance of community and labor working together. Community and labor must come together as times pass. If we're going to move the agenda of the African American community and change the course that our nation is going, we have to see communities come together. We're going to have to vote like we've never ever voted before. We must revitalize that same concept that has been so successful before, that is reaching out and getting labor and community on board and working together. And so I might ask, well, what is it when you talk about communities? Well, communities are people. They are human beings. Look around you out here today. You are community. A community is a group of people who share something in common. You can define a community by the shared attributes of the people in it and or by the strength of the connection that's among them. Of people who are alike in some ways, who feel some sense of belonging, of impersonal connection. And across our nation, since May 25th and the killing of George Floyd, I've seen communities rise up and stand up in an effort to say that enough is enough. Now I want to know if you can say that this afternoon. In unison, can we say enough is enough? Enough is enough. Emmett Till, the vision of Eric Gardner, the vision of Betty Jones and Michael Brown and Breonna Taylor and Mark Aubrey and Janet Wilson and Freddie Gray and George Floyd, and the list go on and on and on. In July 2014, a cell phone video captured some of Eric Gardner's last and final words as New York City police officer sat on his head and pinned him to the ground on a sidewalk, and all we heard is, "I can't breathe." On May 25th of this year, the same word was spoken by George Floyd, who pleaded for release as an offer to nail on his neck and pinned him to the ground on a Minneapolis street. 154 pounds of pressure pinned him to the ground. And so here we are today to say, not just to police, but to every systematic racism system that's in this world, you are on my neck and I need you to move. Now, according to the U.S. Census, estimated blacks make up 13% of the population. However, from the 2015 to 2019 report, they account for 26.4% of all those that are killed by the police in all circumstances. Now, you don't need to see the video of George Floyd with the police officer's knee on his neck as he struggled for his dying breath to know that black people are 3 times more likely to be killed by police than our white counterparts. You don't need to hear the racial statistics on COVID-19 to know that black people have been affected disproportionately. You don't have to see a video to see that. We are here. We are all locked arms together. And we're marching forward, but this should be the last time of this type of action. It should be the last time because we are demanding that this administration move the knee from our neck. And we'll send it for the last time. Can you say it with me? I can't breathe.
I can't breathe.
Move your knee.
Move your knee.
Off my neck.
Off my neck.
What this means, what it means. It means that the House of Labor must come together. It means that community must come together. It means that AFL-CIO and AFGE and machinists and AFGE and SEIU and UAW and IBEW, postal workers and all of labor and the religious community and all the social communities, the civic community must come together and win back our country. We have to make sure that there is food on the table, that bills are paid, and health care is a part of the norm, and we can drive to the store and expect a safe return. We have to make sure. We must make the connection with our community leaders that we must make common cause with trade unions leading their moral authority to denounce voter suppression, oppression of black people, making our communities safe, back at a higher minimum wages that help organized workers all over this country. People are becoming poorer and less secure in the era of hypocrisy. There's no perfect union. And when we look out on America today, we see injustice. As a black man that grew up in Alabama, it is a familiar sight to me because I've lived it. I've seen it. I felt the pain. I remember a little boy at 3 years old going to see his mother at work, who worked in the kitchen in Goodwater, Alabama, a little restaurant called the Old Hickory Restaurant. And when this three-year-old boy saw his mother, he breaks out to run and hug his mother, and he's told to stop. You can't go that way. If you want to go in and see her, you got to go around to the back. I was that 3-year-old boy. I understand what racism looks like. I understand what it feels like. Because I was black and wanted to see my mother, I had to go through the back door. The front door was only for whites. But racism became real to me at 3 years old. And this is not ancient history, brothers and sisters. Just a few decades ago in America, a few decades ago when a young black boy couldn't walk through the door to see his mother because of racist laws. As a 10-year-old boy walking down the dirt roads in Goodwater, Alabama, I remember running and dodging rocks and racial slurs that were thrown at me because I was a black boy. At 13, when The school was integrated. My family moved to Silicaca, Alabama for a better life. We moved into the projects. And it's there where I found and I started to experience a different kind of racism. It was a racism that put up physical barriers. It was racism that put up an emotion and psychological barriers that tried to convince us that because we were black, we were worthless, that we couldn't achieve that, we shouldn't even try. You see, in school, I was considered a smart kid. I was a good student, excellent in my class, and had an excellent reputation, but I was black in Goodwater and in Silicaca, Alabama. So when a friend of mine, we decided to go out for football and decided to play football, it was when the coach saw us together in the locker room that he accused us of stealing. Why? Not because we had anything in our possession, but because there was two black boys in the locker room. My senior year, I continued to excel academically. I was an honor student and a member of the Senior Scholastic Society. I was excited to continue my education, and I went to the school's guidance council, and I said, I want to go to college, and I want you to give me some advice. And she looked at me and said, you're not the one to go to college. She said to me, because you live on the other side of the tracks, you're unworthy. May seem unthinkable, but it's the truth, because it was said that people in the projects couldn't attend college, wouldn't amount to anything. The knee was on my neck. Despite the racism I faced as a black man in the South, I was proud to join the Army, serve my country. When I first put that military uniform on, I hoped that my fellow Americans would see beyond the color of my skin, that they respect my service, that I would share with my country. While I was on my way home, me and a few of my Army friends driving, we were pulled over and said, what are you black boys doing driving this Cadillac with a white top? I submit to you, the knee was on our neck. Then it didn't stop there. On an Army mission, driving to New York City, when I found out that it wasn't much different in the North, I was stopped and told that either you black boys don't give me $85 or you going to jail. I'm here to tell you today, it doesn't change. Wasn't much better. After leaving the military, went to work at Anderson Army Depot, where I joined the AFGE Local 1945. And I believe that the union was an organization where justice and human rights were the main priority and the reason for the union's existence. But when I became president of that local, I was met with total opposition, becoming the first black man to be in charge of a union in that part of Alabama. A black man. As a result, my house was shot in two. Called names. Cars egged. Bottles full of urine put in my mailbox. Dead cats placed in my driveway. Fictitious advertisement about my home and my automobiles with my telephone number placed in the buy-sell bulletins. I understand what it looked like. When I see these protesters in the street, I think of all of that. I think of how far we still have to go. And I now know that if someone will not willingly remove the pressure from my neck, I learned a maneuver. You see, I learned to fight. I learned karate, and I learned boxing. And I understand that any time a person has been in a hole, if you can just learn the maneuver, you can get out of the hole. And I'm just admitting that today that there's going to be a real change. But in order for us to realize the change, we got to learn the maneuver. And this maneuver comes at the voting booth. As the national president of AFGE in 2020, I recognize that racism still exists. Sometimes in the places we least expect it. Sometimes in places we thought would be the safe havens from racism. And I come to tell us today that I'm on a mission. My mission is to change that. Because it's not acceptable that black and white Americans are treated differently. It's not right that people who look like me find ourselves under suspicion just because we drive a car or because we're going on a run. Sometimes white America do the same thing but without consequences. For generations, black parents have had to have the talk with their children. The talk of how to interact with police. My parents gave it to me and I gave it to my boys, and now I find myself giving it to my grandsons. And I think it's sad, come and tell you, we got to tell our young black boys that if you get pulled over by the police, first thing you do is grab your hands, place them on the dashboard, and don't make a move for nothing. And regardless of how bad you're treated, you just shrug your head and say, yes, sir. I come to tell you it's dehumanizing to know that police could turn violent just because of the color of your skin. No matter how good a student you are, no matter what sort of status you attain in life. And that humiliation has been at the heart of every single major unrest around race in American history. This fight, brothers and sisters, didn't begin last week. No, it started with slavery. And it's been happening for hundreds of years, generation after generation, but for the first time in a long time. I don't know about you, but I feel that a change is possible. It feels like change is possible when I look out and I see the massive protests. When I see that they have erupted not just in cities across the United States, but all across the globe. I feel like change is possible. When legislators start taking action to address institutional racism. I feel like change is possible when I see you all right here in Huntsville, Alabama, standing up and demanding a change. Standing up and saying that black lives matter. That anybody that believes that black lives matter. So has the labor movement. What is our calling today? What can we do in this moment of calamity for our nation? When we all see stark racial injustice, because to speak out isn't enough. To show up at a protest isn't enough. To bargain better contracts isn't enough. Because as one of the great leaders of our labor movement, Walter Reverend said, he said the bread box is tied to the ballot box. And everything that's won at the negotiating table can be taken away in the legislative halls. And we know that the situation we find ourselves in today isn't just happenstance. It's a result of affirmative choices by those that are in power. My union, AFGE, is dealing with a lot of these very issues at this moment. We have a president who hates federal workers, who hates unions, hates people of color, hates immigrants, hates people of the LGBTQ community, who reacts wildly to even the wildest or the mildest criticism. He tried to destroy our union by taking away our collective bargaining rights and our ability to represent members in the workplace. Even at this moment, the Equal Opportunity Commission under Trump is trying to make it harder to defend federal workers to bring forward claims of discrimination. Like his theory on testing for the coronavirus, the president believes that if we simply ignore the problem, it means that somehow it will go away. In the most simplest terms, we have an employer that is trying to inflict pain on us. They want to speak out about the damage done to our democracy. That's what we ought to do by these union-busting efforts to use the power of the federal government to divide us rather than to unite us. But as President Obama has pointed out, it's not a question of raising our voice or voting. It's not a question of protesting or politics. To unite our country behind a common vision to racial justice, we got to do both of them. As union members, as leaders in the labor movement, we must do both. Because real solution requires real power. And the greatest power we have as Americans is when we stand together. when we raise our voice for change, when we wake up on November the 3rd, 2020, and march in unison to the polling place. And we will use an old maneuver that proven successful. It's called the power and the maneuver of the vote. The voting booth maneuver. When we use our power to vote. When we elect a government that represents our interests. When we put people in power that will fight injustice instead of bringing about injustice. When we elect leadership that will unite this country instead of dividing this country. You may not know it, but for 31 years I pastored a Baptist church not far from here in Lincoln, Alabama. And on many occasions I was asked, how is it that you can pastor and be involved in the union? They said, I don't understand because they don't mix. My response was this: you evidently don't know much about the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You evidently don't know much about what he stood for. I believe that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a great example of following the teachings of Jesus. If you've done that, it's in the least of these, my brethren, you've done it under me. Dr. King, as you all know, was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee in 1968, while in the midst of defending the rights of public sector employees. Too many times Dr. King's legacy is described too narrowly as if he had only been concerned with ending segregation and promoting civil rights and voting rights. But there's nothing narrow about Dr. King's vision of his advocacy. Dr. King, most famous, I Have a Dream speech, delivered in 1963. He implicitly talked about the link between civil rights and economic justice. The March on Washington in 1963 was for jobs and freedom. Dr. King recognized the linkage was expressed and made manifest in the struggle of unions for dignity, fair pay, respect for all workers, especially those who work benefited everybody, to include public sector workers. That is, Dr. King focused on people like my union members. And remember, Dr. King said, let us keep the issue where they are. The issue is injustice. The issue is refusing at that time of Memphis to be fair and honest with the dealings with his servants, who happened to be at that time sanitation workers. Now we got to keep attention on this, and on the fact that those 1,300 sanitation workers were on strike at this time, and Memphis wasn't being fair to them. So when we talk about labor in the community, for many means following the past that have been set forth by leaders like Dr. King, I've always put bread and butter issues first and foremost, but as a minister and a labor leader. Why? Because, as it often pointed out in the Lord's Prayer, our very first petition is for our daily bread, because no one can worship God or love his neighbor on an empty stomach. So I concluded that man has to both eat physically and spiritually. It is the church that provides spiritual food, and labor that provides the physical. And they are both equally important. And when you mesh them together, I want to tell you that you have a whole man. So just like Dr. King's era, we have at the top of our list to deal with the racial injustice. We have at the top of our list to deal with police brutality. I've been first to admit that every police officer is not a bad police officer, but those that are make it bad for all. This is our agenda, because our agenda is justice. Our agenda is mercy, kindness, dignity, and fairness. At every level, not just the personal, not just in the family, not just in the neighborhood or the community, but nationally and internationally, this must have to be our agenda. And the only way we can have any concept of hope for our agenda is to let people to office who are sensitive to the issues in a deep way, who have a real plan to address the issues that we face as a people, and who believe will follow through in enacting those plans. How are we going to achieve this? Well, it has to be through unity. It has to be through unity of purpose, of course, but also there has to be unity of action. If labor and community are going to have a successful coalition for this year's election, we must collectively accept the same agenda. For me, there's no real difference between a labor agenda than a Christian agenda. There's no difference between the labor agenda and the Black Lives Matter agenda, because I still believe that it's all God's work. God has told us over and over again that I need somebody to go down and tell Pharaoh to let my people go. Is there anybody this evening that's willing to go down and tell Pharaoh to get his knee off of the neck of God's people? I plead with everyone here following Dr. King's lead that you engage in your community, engage in your church, in your synagogue, in your mosque, in your temple, and together we will win. If we are going to win, it has to be labor and community. If we are going to win, it has to be labor and Black Lives Matter. If we're going to win, it has to be labor, clergy, and Black Lives Matter. If we're going to win, it has to be labor, machinists, CBC, and census. If we're going to win, it has to be labor, CBC, clergy, and NAACP. If we're going to win, it has to be labor, CBC, NAACP, and APRI. If we stand together, my brothers and sisters, I believe we can win. If we're going to win, it has to be all of us if we are going to win. We can do this if we stand together as community and labor together. Is there anybody that believes we can win this evening? If you believe that we can win, why don't you stand on your feet with me this evening and say, I rise because I believe we can win. We need to rise up, my brothers and sisters. Stay engaged in political, racial, social, and economic issues. We need to rise up and march on to victory. We need to go down and tell Pharaoh that I am said, let my people go. We need to rise up and go down and tell Pharaoh, rise up and work beyond the election day. Rise up for fair and just criminal justice system. Rise up and create a just society where human beings and labor rights are one and the same. Rise up and take our country back from this racist bigot that we have in the White House. Rise up and be great leaders that God has created us to be. Because I keep on telling us that this is God's work. And I want to tell you this evening that we have to continue to rise, and we have to continue to fight like we never fought before. I don't know about you, but I got to tell you this. I remember a while ago when I was in my teenage years, there was a group called Sister Sledge that sang a song that said, we are family. And then I remember a story was told about a little boy that would go to school every day, and on the way to school, the bigger boys would pick on him, and they would mess with him, and they would thump his head. And so the boy said, I got to find me an alternative route to go to school. And so the boy noticed that after a few days he wasn't coming around and he wasn't going to school. And they said, well, what we'll do, we'll go to his house and we'll get him before he leaves going to school. And so this day they went to the little boy's house and they knocked on the door. And when they knocked on the door, out come a feisty-year-old, 80-year-old grandmother. Out comes an uncle and two brothers and a mother and sisters. And little boy, he looked up at his dad and said, Daddy, you told me that I need to always avoid trouble. But if trouble ever knocks on our door, you'll be right there to stand together. And I declare to you today that trouble has knocked on our door. And I just want to know, are you willing to stand with your family today? Your family might not be the same color that you are. Your family might not look like you look. But nevertheless, they are family. Will you stand with your family today? If you stand with your family, let me hear you say, I'll stand. And I'll rise. I'll fight with my family. I'll go down on November November the 3rd, and I'll vote this out. Thank you. God bless you.